On November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a man in a dark suit walked up to the counter at Portland International Airport and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He paid cash. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. Nobody looked at him twice. Business travelers in suits were the least suspicious thing on the Boeing 727. In 1971, he took a window seat near the back, ordered a bourbon and soda, and waited until the plane was airborne. Then he passed a note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was a phone number. Men did that constantly, she'd say later. She slipped it in her pocket without reading it. Cooper leaned over and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note was short. He wanted $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting when they landed in Seattle. He opened his briefcase just enough to show her a tangle of wires and cylinders. Whether it was ever a real bomb, no one has ever been able to say. The plane circled Seattle for hours while the FBI scrambled to meet his demands. The largest ransom in American hijacking history to that point, paid in unmarked $20 bills, their serial numbers secretly photographed one by one. When the money and parachutes arrived, the plane landed, and Cooper let all 36 passengers go. He kept the crew. Then he asked for the strangest thing of all. He wanted the plane back in the air, flying low and slow toward Mexico, with the rear staircase. The actual air stairs at the tail of the 727, lowered the entire time somewhere over the wooded, rain-soaked border of Washington and Oregon, close to 8 o'clock at night, in a storm. The cockpit crew felt the plane buck once. A warning light blinked on for the aft stairs. When they finally checked the cabin at gunpoint hours later, Cooper was gone. So was the money. So were 2 of the parachutes he had jumped. In the dark, in freezing rain, over some of the most unforgiving wilderness in the Pacific Northwest, and he was never seen again. What followed was the biggest manhunt the FBI had run up to that point. Helicopters swept the forest along the flight path for weeks. Search teams on the ground combed riverbanks and clear-cuts. The army was brought in. Nothing turned up. No parachute, no body, no briefcase, nothing. And here's where the story gets stranger than most people remember. The press got his name wrong almost immediately. A reporter chasing the story misheard a police radio reference to a different man being questioned, a man named D.B. Cooper who had nothing to do with the hijacking, and the wrong name went out over the wire before anyone caught the mistake. It stuck. The actual hijacker had called himself Dan Cooper. The world has spent over 50 years hunting a man under a name that was never his. For 9 years, the case went cold. Then, in February 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand along the Columbia River, near Vancouver, Washington, while his family cooked out on the beach. He uncovered 3 decaying bundles of cash, still bound with rubber bands that crumbled at the touch. The FBI ran the serial numbers. They matched Cooper's ransom money exactly, but it was only $5,800. Out of $200,000. No trace of the other $194,000 ever turned up. No trace of Cooper. The money had clearly been in the ground for years, buried in sediment that geologists later argued couldn't have simply washed there from the jump site, raising a question that's never been resolved. Did Cooper bury it himself before he died somewhere nearby? Did the river carry it there from somewhere else entirely? Nobody knows. Investigators spent decades chasing leads. A Vietnam veteran and skilled skydiver named Richard McCoy Jr., who pulled off a nearly identical hijacking 8 months later. A dying man named Wayne Weber, whose wife came forward after his death saying he'd confessed to being Cooper on his deathbed. A Northwest Orient employee named Kenneth Christensen, who fit the physical description almost perfectly. None of them were ever confirmed. Every promising lead eventually hit a dead end. In July 2016, after 45 years, the FBI formally suspended active investigation of the case, not because it was solved, but because they'd run out of leads worth chasing, and needed the resources elsewhere. It remains, to this day, the only unsolved commercial hijacking in American aviation history. Somewhere in the wilderness between Portland and Seattle, there's still, by the FBI's own accounting, nearly $194,000 that was never recovered. Whether it's still buried in the mud of a riverbank, whether it disintegrated decades ago, or whether someone quietly spent it without ever telling a soul, that part of the story never got an ending.